I'm trying to beat the skip. Do I succeed all the time? Absolutely not. But telling the stories is the way to go. If they go through the same journey that I go through in understanding all sorts of facets of American culture, then we couldn't help but be a better country in the years to come.
Welcome to the Media Roundtable. We're talking to leading podcasters and creators about the shows they create, why they create them, and the impact that they have on the world around them. So, look, whether you're a listener or a member of the advertising community, you're going to be able to better understand the content that's out there and feel good about what you consume and what you support. I'm your host, Dan Granger, and today we're joined by Lindsay Graham. And no, not that Lindsay Graham. This is the Lindsay Graham podcast producer phenom who has taken the world by storm with Webby award-winning shows like American Scandal, American History Tellers, Business Movers, American Elections, Wicked Game, and he's also a driving force behind hits like Dirty John, Dr. Death, and many others. So welcome to the show, Lindsay. So glad that you're here.
Well, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
So you've gotten to touch this industry from so many different sides. Do you mind just sharing a little bit about your background before you got into podcasting?
Sure. Most of it has absolutely nothing to do with podcasting. I have an undergraduate degree in business. I have a MBA in marketing, and I did those kind of things as you do. I worked mostly in the nonprofit space for the bulk of my career, but also in insurance and some other places. The podcasting career came as somewhat of an accident. I've always been, however, deeply attracted to audio. I'm a musician. I'm a composer. I've done a bunch of sound for TV and short films and things like that. Mostly local stuff. And I suppose if I had my druthers, my perfect career would be like a record producer. So I've always been kind of behind the microphone in a certain way, certainly twiddling knobs. And I had this little studio that I'm talking to you now from. In a moment the short answer is I got fired from an insurance company, and that's fine because I hated it. And I went home to my wife and said, you know what, we're at this place, we have two incomes. Let me try and make audio a career. And the very condensed version is I almost did, because I came out with a podcast, an audio drama called Terms, and it attracted the attention of Wondery. At the time, this is 2016, Wondery was much
Brand
more
new.
involved in, very early on in their trajectory. And back then, Hernan Lopez, CEO, really wanted to see scripted podcasts, fictional podcasts, become a thing, and I had one, and they distributed it and published it, and it didn't do that well. So everyone liked it, but it just didn't get the screaming audience numbers that was necessary for its continuing. So after a while, I found myself in my early audio career ending. Yeah, I just went back to the workforce. And it was a great experiment until a few months after that. Hernan called me up out of the blue and asked if I could read and write ads for this new show he's got coming called Dirty John. The reason for that was because the host of Dirty John's a journalist, and he can't endorse products. And Hernan really liked the way I wrote and read ads on Terms. So it was just a bolt of lightning out of the blue. And in the same phone call, he asked if I would like to host and sound design a new history podcast he's thinking of called American History Tellers. So I said yes to both of those things, and my podcast career really began. So on January 3rd, 2018, History Tellers debuted, and it hit #1 on the iTunes charts within days, and it hasn't been the same for me since.
So you've become nearly synonymous with the nonfiction subject matter. Is that by accident, or is that something about who you are and who you've always been that's drawn you to that?
Yeah, the answer to that is yes. I mean, I've always been interested in nonfiction because it's an exploration of our real world, right? We have real problems in this real world that need real solutions, and many of them are anchored in the past, in history, things that the lessons we seek are available to us. Um, but it was also the job that was offered to me. I mean, being frank, that was the place that I started. It suited me though, and I started in the history space with history tellers, and then kind of moved adjacent to American Scandal, which is more history but kind of a little more salacious, and then we went into political history with Wicked Game, and now we're into business history with Business Movers. So it's all of a piece, but different views and of the same thing. But it is all nonfiction except for the scripted stuff I do. But even then, 1865, for instance, is a historical fiction, so it's rooted in fact as well. Yeah, I like the space because even though it's true, even though it's real, even though you could pick up a book and read these facts, many people don't know them, and they certainly don't know the context, because I think telling the story of them is much more evocative and educational than perhaps what they got in high school or college.
I'm with you. I actually, before getting into radio, I worked for a History Channel documentary company. And I love all the content that you do. And it's so cool that you got your start really with Hernan. Hernan was our first guest officially on this podcast. And he's been a very good friend to our agency, Oxford Road, over the years. So very, very good guy. So as you're making this type of content, you've really had an evolving role in it. I mean, you didn't go to any kind of voice training school or anything like that, but you've really become a name and a brand behind a lot of these things. How has that progressed?
Yeah. No, in terms of classical training, I have none.
Yeah.
I don't have a theater background. I didn't go to audio engineering school. I mean, it's all just feet first, do it. And I was terrified in the beginning. Hernan made a horrible gamble with me. He just knew I could do it. More so than I thought of myself. And so, how have I progressed? I think I've just learned on the job. I do have, I think, a good ear, that I brought with me. So I know if I screw up, I know it, and I probably also know how to fix it.
Yeah.
So I do have that skill in that I'm always critically listening, even in the midst of my sentences and my narration. And I brought with it, that sort of sound designy, composer producer mindset to the whole thing. And, which is good because podcast is an audio medium, and I have that skill set. But no, I was shaking in my boots the first couple of times I had to narrate, or especially these reenactments that are in my show. So, I have to
Yeah, you're acting too. You're Abraham Lincoln. You're like all these different people. It's like, what a burden.
No, sometimes I'm Susan B. Anthony. Sometimes a 4-year-old child, and I don't affect accents or really try too hard to sound like these characters. I think that would be a mistake. But yeah, it was something new for me. That's for sure.
Well, it's kind of funny. So one of my favorite more recent movies is The Death of Stalin, which is loosely based on historical events, right?
Mm-hmm.
But what was really interesting is they've got British actors, they've got American actors. Nobody's doing a Russian accent the whole time. Right. And you know what? It doesn't matter. It doesn't take anything away from it. I don't know if people ever realized that you could pull that off if you go back a few decades, but it seems to make it somehow more natural, even though that might be counterintuitive.
Well, they it was a joke at the time, but they did it with Robin Hood. Costner
didn't bother. Yeah, he
didn't bother.
But they didn't like that when he did it. That was like an early prototype of the model. Yeah. It seems like it's gotten more effectively delivered since then. So let's talk about what we're trying to do with the evolution of this program is get a little bit more into helping people understand what your content's about, but also like why and what is the impact. So when you look back on your body of work so far, and I know in some ways you're just getting started, but what work are you most proud of that you've been able to work on, and why are you proud of it?
That's really hard to answer. I mean, because at any one moment I'm in the midst of something new, but all of my shows have a mission, and the mission is similar, to educate listeners about American history for the reason to use it as a mirror in our modern age. And for that reason, there are seasons in History Tellers, there's seasons in Scandal that really speak to me. The entire purpose of Wicked Game was to tell our listeners that this political moment that we were in, coming up to 2020, was
not the
was
first
just
time we've had a problem, right?
not the first time. No, it's been horrific and sometimes just as violent and repulsive, and we need to remember that. If only just to get some sense of consolation, or that it's okay. We've lived through it before. 1865, even though that's scripted, I think is very important because it really tells the story of Reconstruction, which is just a forgotten era in American history, which is bizarre because it sets up the next 150 years. We are still fighting those battles right now, with race relations and voting rights and poverty, and equality. These are all issues that might have been solved if things had gone a little differently in 1865.
Well, look, I know you don't call yourself a historian, but knowing how deep you went into 1865 and that period, do you think things would be drastically different if Lincoln hadn't been assassinated?
Oh, there's no...
Reconstruction would have been a totally different deal.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, mainly because Johnson wouldn't have been president, right? Mm-hmm. That was the moment that the South got back into the halls of power, perhaps too quickly and with too little price to pay. Mm-hmm. Now, I think it was just a horrible moment. I mean, what do you do with one half of the nation who was previously at war with you, and you want to bring them back into the fold? What did happen was just a collapse of the effort. It got too hard, and there weren't enough people holding on to the mission of the Civil War and the early Reconstruction period. Grant came in too late, and he was undermined. He was not a great politician. I think it would have been completely different if we had a solid Lincoln administration with maybe a successor or a third term, and Johnson wasn't there to introduce the first chink into the armor.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, and when you look at the last, I mean, listen, part of our goal here is, we want to see media doing more to be edifying than destructive, right? And we know that media can be used for harm or for good. And so we talk to people on both sides of the political spectrum. But without question, I think we can all agree the last 5 years have been different. They've been unorthodox, to say the least. When you look at the recent history of this country, especially in the last two, what period of time do you liken it to based on the work that you've done in the other periods you've covered? What do you look back for a proxy?
Well, I mean, it's certainly not a great analog, but probably the end of our last war, a large war, Vietnam.
Yeah.
I mean, 68 to 74, America was tearing itself to pieces.
Yeah.
We had violence in the streets. We had real problems with equity and equality and economics, and we didn't have a pandemic, but there was more than enough to go around. It was a hard time. And I think this was the one of the first moments in which America was as polarized as perhaps we are today, when we knew that there were definite sides. It wasn't just Democrat or Republican, but it was the yippies and the hippies and the Reds, and like just everyone had a tribe, and some of them were anti-American. So yeah, I would go back to that period. 68 to 74 was rough.
Okay, and if you were going to prescribe any content that you've created across all the different work that you've done for somebody that's trying to make sense of the time we're in, is there one that you've done that covers that specifically?
We did do a crossover series with Legal Wars, the trial of the Chicago Seven, which is a look at that particular moment. The Netflix film was great too, by the way.
Yeah, I was going to ask what you thought of that.
But Sorkin's just great at this sort of storytelling, even though he takes license.
Sure.
But honestly, I would also go to Wicked Game, because it touches it. It's a every 4 year survey of the entirety of American history, and so if you started and just found those, the death of JFK, and then listen through LBJ to Nixon, you would get a good idea of how much this nation changed, politically, socially, economically, the whole gamut.
Yeah, interesting. Okay, so let's talk just about the industry for a minute. I mean, you've been involved for, I'd say, the key part of the podcast industry's history, where it's really come into people's consciousness. It's really gone mainstream while you've been in it. What do you think is the current state of the business of podcasts as you see it?
Well, yeah, I mean, just even in the 3 or 4 years that I've been doing it, it's completely changed. I think it's universally recognized that there's been a professionalization of the industry.
Yeah.
I think that's demonstrated all over the place. I mean, I personally can't get away with some of the stuff I got away with in the early days of we can let a release date slide a couple of hours and we'll post it tomorrow. The effort and money it takes to launch a new show successfully has completely increased, probably tenfold. I mean, the idea that my first show, History Tellers, hit #1 on iTunes for no good reason back in 2018, that would not happen today. And so I'm lucky that I started when I started. Business Movers came out just this year, and had an enormous marketing budget behind it. So certainly, multiples of History Tellers, and it didn't scale the charts like History Tellers did. It's for a variety of different reasons, but yeah, it's just harder. There's not just more content available. There's always been so much content, but now there's so much good content.
Yeah.
It's very hard to rise to the top, and there also seems to be some warring formats. The chat interview show is very different than the narrative stuff that I do, and there are some people who still only think about podcasts as people chatting at each other, and so I think there's still remains a large amount of education in the listeners' ears about what a podcast is or can be. But the state of the industry in general, even though it's harder to get a hit, it's all it's done is just gotten better, and it seems to still be growing. Other than a few hiccups with Apple recently, everything's been moving up.
Yeah. And when you look at the importance, I mean, of course you have to have a good product, right? But how do you make a podcast successful in this day and age with so much competition? Is marketing, can something be successful without marketing? What are the keys, as you've found it, to make something actually reach people now that things are the way they are?
I think if there was an answer for that, I would be much more wealthy than I am. Um, Discoverability remains a problem, I think.
Yeah.
And there's so many platforms, and even as they have new platforms have arisen, giant ones, like Spotify. Um, there's become this balkanization of your attention for marketing. And not only do you have to market your show on other shows and perhaps on social, but you have to market to the platforms, and there's 4 or 5 of them you have to pay attention to, and it's the fragmentation of your attention makes it very difficult. Can you do it without marketing? Probably not. I mean, not intentionally.
Yeah.
You can't say that I've got a great show and it will become a hit
If you
without
build
me
it, they
marketing.
will come. Yeah. It doesn't
Yeah,
work.
I mean, like there are natural freak phenomenon that happen like that, but you didn't plan them. So if you're planning a successful podcast, you have to plan for marketing. There's just no way.
Yeah, for sure. And have you found anything to be as effective in marketing as advertising in other similar podcasts?
I don't think so. I haven't been on top of all the experiments that Wondery has tried, for instance.
Sure.
And I know they're doing testing as everyone should be. But it does seem that right now, especially, the easiest place to get podcast listeners is on other podcasts.
Yeah.
And so the marginal utility of your next advertising dollar, if you spend it elsewhere, is probably less than if you spend it on a podcast.
Yeah. Well, and the team at Wondery really mastered that. I think they created a template for the marketplace to follow a long time ago. And they figured out how to make hits. Same way as a movie. You show trailers in a theater, that happens to help. Okay, so let's talk a little bit more about the shows that you've got active right now. Can you give us a little rundown of what your current projects are?
Sure. There are 3 weekly shows right now running. So American History Tellers and American Scandal, and then the newest one, Business Movers. 1865 and Terms, the 2 audio dramas, remain up and available. But Terms is probably defunct, and 1865 is waiting for momentum behind its next season, which may happen sometime. American Elections Wicked Game, I guess, is on a 3-year hiatus until the next election comes around. That was a 59 episode limited series.
Yeah. Well, you can always go local.
Yeah. Well, there was some thought about I mean, we've had elections of all sorts. There's congressional elections and local elections that make the difference. But in the moment, though, the decision for me was it wasn't the same mission, and the effort could be applied better maybe elsewhere.
And when you make a show, you've really got you must have a formula for quality. Can you take us through your manufacturing process, at least at a high level?
Yeah. So let's talk about Business Movers, I guess, because it's the most recent one, and one that I actually have the most editorial control over. So this is done in conjunction with Wondery, but my company Airship actually at this point does the content as well as the production. So we come up with a list of topics, hooks that we propose to Wondery, and they come back to us with their recommendations. And their recommendations are based mostly on marketing concerns, how they can tie things to other podcasts or dates on the calendar, or just things that they've learned in general from how to market shows, especially new ones that are 6-8 months old. So we will get a blessing of a topic calendar from them, and then the writing starts. Right. My partner Steve Walters has written many of them. He's the executive content producer for Business Movers, but we've hired writers out, contracted them, It starts with an outline. We know that we'll probably do about 4 episodes minimum of any one topic. And we know that there's a format to the show. There's a 5-minute intro and two 15-minute act 1 and act 2, and then a 10-minute act 3. And we have word counts. And, we also know that this show is very narrative and character driven. So we have to identify who the characters are, what the theme is, and how it's going to pull together in a 3-act structure across an episode. So pretty quickly an outline comes together. The outline is done in the midst of the research process. Then the writing starts.
Okay.
And thankfully, we've gotten to the point where I almost always receive a finished script. Earlier days, there have been times in which I'll receive a script and it is not ready to air. And that's frustrating for everyone because mainly I won't know it until I'm in the middle of narrating it. That I don't understand what the hell is going on, or I suddenly realize that Act 2 is completely bonkers and needs to be restructured. So at this point, I will receive a script and I'll just open it up and I'll start narrating. I've never read it before; it's cold, and I actually like that now, as opposed to reading it, editing it, revising it, sending it back, getting it back, because I become the first listener. Even though obviously I'm also narrating at the same time, I'm listening as our listeners might. And so I understand when the story gets bogged down or gets confusing or is in the weeds, and I can fix it. I improvise all the time.
Oh, wow.
in the scripts. Rewriting, small things, but most of them are streamlining and getting the flow. It's something I ask for all the time. Like, what's the flow? There's nothing worse than just a litany of facts, a book report, being read aloud to you. We need the compelling flow of time and character to wash over you, and that's what I look for when I start narrating.
And
after that,
question: do you have a ratio of how much of the time should be spent hearing dialogue versus any other background?
Well, I think most of my shows have these reenactment bits that you're probably referring to.
Yeah.
And so those are short, 500-800 word interludes, and there's probably 4 per episode. They certainly do have their own formulas, and I do not like interjecting narration when dialogue can carry it. I think if you're going to be in a reenactment moment, then you should rely on the reenactment and not so much the narration. But exposition gets difficult there. It's an art. I mean, like we're screenwriting at that point. It's no longer just an academic exercise of telling the story through historical narrative. Now we've dropped into full-on character development and stuff that many other writers don't have to think about. But we have to know quickly what characters' motivations are, who they are, what is the tension, what is the compromise they seek, and it all has to be done in 7 sentences pretty much. So
yeah,
it's tough. Yeah, but there's no fixed ratio.
Have you found that any of the principles for creating content are transferable over to the ads that you are involved with?
Yeah, absolutely. So ads are a similar creative exercise. If we strip out the mandatory copy, right? Like the stuff that the client just has to have in there.
Never heard of it.
No, yeah. And go into the stuff that the client really wants the host to provide. It becomes an exercise in miniature storytelling. It's the same thing. Who's the character? What's the POV? What's the conflict? What's the problem that's going to be solved at the end of this conversation, this 45-second, this 60-second conversation I'm having with my listeners. And my shows are narrative. I'm kind of a voice of God. There's not a lot of my personality. I don't talk about my cats or what I had for breakfast in the middle of the podcast, but I might in the ads if it serves the purpose of telling a story. I also might tie it to content that's in the episode. If it's a baked in ad, it doesn't really make sense if. So I'll try really hard to tell a small story, or draw upon an anecdote that is universally applicable. I was writing ads all day today, and I don't know. I even forget who it was for. But the idea was everyone has stubbed their toe, and this is a problem because it hurts like the dickens, but the pain goes away, right? And that was the small catch. Everyone's stubbed their toe. Everyone knows it hurts, and everyone knows they'll get over it. Except if they don't get over it, then there's a real problem, and that's we lead into real problems. Times when businesses. It feels like this might be something you can get over, but it's not. I don't know. It's just a bad analogy. It was great for the copy, but storytelling is imperative in these ads. Otherwise, it's just I can read bullet points to you and sound good, but I don't know if it's really compelling.
Narrative wins.
Yes.
So, all right, when you create content, there's networks, there's production companies, there's talent. Do you have like an audio signature, or how does somebody know that you've got your stamp on the work?
Well, other than my voice, right?
I guess is there? By the way, is there anything you're involved with that does not have your voice?
Yeah.
Okay.
I do. My company does the sound design for two other history podcasts. Patrick Wyman's Tides of History, which is on Wondery, and then another one, History That Doesn't Suck, which is an independent podcast. And I think if you listen to those, you would hear similarities in probably the rich soundscape. We try very, very hard to it's overused, but be immersive in our sound design. There's a certain school of sound design that's Mickey Mouse. Like every action has an accompanying sound. Whether it's a boing or a splat. And we tried really hard not to Mickey Mouse. We want this to be a real 360 soundscape that puts you in the moment and gives you. And if it's not specific, it's at least very evocative of whatever's going on. So I would hope that there's that sort of signature in all the stuff we do.
Yeah. Well, and okay, so there's no like at the beginning of a movie or the beginning of a hip hop song where there's like a signature sound that you have every time, at least yet, so that people can know that this is a Lindsay Graham production.
No sonic,
No sonic
ID
branding. Yeah, I got you.
Yeah.
I got you. Okay, cool. And then tell me about the audience. What do you know about the people who consume the shows that you make? Are there common attributes or characteristics?
Well, I actually can't tell you about the data because I don't dig into it too much. I've never had to because I'm not personally selling the ads. Wondery is handling that for the vast majority of my shows. I do have anecdotal evidence because I interact with listeners all the time on social media and other channels. And they are all over the place. I don't think that you could make any generalizations about who they are, how old they are, what they do. I can tell you that they're alive and they're listening.
Okay.
Other than that, there's a deep respect for history, absolute thirst for knowing more. There's a peculiar, in a certain segment of listening to things they already know a lot about.
Lindsay, it's interesting because I think a lot of times, especially for people that work in this industry on the advertising side, people don't really know what it's like being on the other side of the copy that they're handed, right? And so, do you get any type of feedback about what the audience thinks, wants, what they do after hearing the ads? What's the feedback loop like?
Non-existent. I don't think I've
Non-existent.
ever received feedback. I've every once in a while, maybe there's a funny ad that someone mentions on Twitter, that a listener has given me some feedback. From clients, I don't hear a thing. Other than please redo it. We don't like this. Um,
and what do you wish you received? Would you prefer if you had more feedback? Because I think that's an interesting note.
I think I would love more feedback, especially the positive feedback, because it tells me what to do next time. I mean, oftentimes these campaigns go on for months and the instructions don't change.
Yeah.
Just week after week after week, I'm confronted with the same bullet points and the same instructions, and I have to come up with something new, knowing what is was enjoyed by the client or what worked for them would certainly help me replicate that. Because not knowing it means that I might take a giant left turn on my next ad because I don't know any better. I've got to come up with something new,
Yeah.
and so I might I might move away from something that they know works. Of course, it is there's a large subjective portion to this, and one client's employee may have a very different opinion than another client employee.
We've heard about
So
that. Yeah.
yeah, um, I've received completely different sets of notes for pretty much the same ad.
Conflicting instructions
Yeah,
on the same copy.
yeah.
Yeah.
Um, this portion is mandatory, and also make it up, make it your own, and
Right, right,
so.
right. Exactly.
But yeah, no, I don't receive any client feedback that is positive and
Yeah.
reinforcing.
Yeah.
Most of all, it's just they would like something redone.
Well, that's an interesting note for the industry. Now, you mentioned earlier you don't, at least you're not seeking a lot of the kind of qualitative audience data that maybe the people that are selling the show or buying the show want to look at. Do you, though, have in your mind what the profile of a listener in your head? Do you have an archetype that you're thinking about or a person that you know that you go, I want this person to like what I'm making?
Yeah, I do. It's tempered by the client because oftentimes, with shows, certainly shows as large as American Scandal, the audience is very diverse. This is not
Yeah.
a niche show.
Yeah.
So what I need to do is think about who the client's archetype really is, because I've got them in my audience. I know for certain, and I know my audience likes stories told in a certain manner. So that's really what I think about. I mean, if it's a business product, I think about the business person who's listening on their commute, or maybe in the gym. If it's a lifestyle product, I'll think about perhaps the younger person who's listening elsewhere and for different reasons. Um,
Oh, yeah, and you're answering specifically about the products themselves, which is awesome.
yeah.
What about with the actual show?
Well, I think it is less to do with the actual show, mainly because the audience is really broad. I
Yeah.
mean, there's David and there's Sally, and they're not really that similar.
Yeah.
Now, I know certain things that like History Teller skews male and Scandal skews female, and there's a 20% overlap between the two shows. Some high level stuff. But most of the time, I'm really just trying to tell a story similar in the same manner that I tell the rest of the story, which is the episode,
Mm-hmm.
and want to make it as compelling as I'm trying to beat the skip. Fundamentally, that's the thing I need to beat, the 15-second, 30-second skip, and do I succeed all the time? Absolutely not. But telling the story is the way to go.
Yeah, for sure. So we were talking earlier about your mission with every program that you do and what that can actually do for people. And so I guess if you could go elaborate a little bit more on that, what do you hope the consequence will be for people in real life when they have listened to one of the programs that you've created? Is it that they be entertained, informed, that they take an action? What's like the North Star for you?
Um, well, I think I'll answer this, personally and maybe controversially. I've learned along with my audience quite a bit about American history. And, for instance, I did not know about the Tulsa Race Massacre of 1921
Hmm.
until I did a series on it. There were a lot of things I did not know. And I think, like a lot of my listeners, after having done it, I wish I had known because it gives so much context to our present moment. I mean, I think if you look at the events of the summer of 2020, the George Floyd riots and marches, and the just growing chorus for racial equity and reform and police action, it makes so much more sense if you know from 1865 on all the moments in which this large portion of our American populace were repressed. And it also makes me understand better what the counter arguments might be to, oh, why do you keep bringing up racism? You know, um, or why other people keep bringing up racism. I don't know that, either of those are great things to say. That's racist. Why do you keep calling me racist? That's usually the end of the discourse. But
Right.
it could be so much more rich and understanding. So, um, personally, I just understand our country better. I understand my countrymen better. I understand everything about America and fellow Americans better. And I can forgive those persons who are too quick to dismiss the complexity and nuance and deep history of this problem. And I'm also able to understand when people can't communicate when their rights are being trampled or when they think it's just a bunch of complaining. They're kind of all valid because they're all ignorant.
Hmm.
And I understand so much better having learned these things. Um, is there a call to action for my listeners? Not particularly. But if they go through the same journey that I go through in understanding all sorts of facets of American culture, and it's not just the hot button issues, it's all of them, um, then we couldn't help but be a better country in the years to come.
So when you're looking at the news today, I imagine you have a profound sense of awareness that you're reading history that just hasn't been told in that way yet.
Yeah.
Um, when you think about today becoming history, what to you is the most concerning that's going on in the world right now?
Well, I mean, history has a long horizon, right?
Yeah.
So even though we've got a lot of troubles, I would suspect it's climate that would be the most important chapter in the history books being written 100 years from now. What we did or did not do to address the climate crisis, because frankly, none of the other stuff matters
Mm.
if we're all drowned or scorched. Um, So yeah, I would say that it's highly unfortunate that we've gotten to the place where half the country is flooded and the other half is on fire. Um, but it might be necessary to become so obvious to us that action is needed. I don't think there's probably a bigger crisis that will be written about in the future.
And have you done any content yet that you feel really helps people have a deeper understanding of that issue?
Probably not. No.
Okay, so we know what's coming.
Yeah. Um, one of the hard things about having a mission is realizing that you're failing at it. I like my shows. My listeners like my shows. And I think I'm doing a good job. And but there are still problems in the world. I didn't solve it. I did, a history podcast did not fix the world, and it's upsetting. Honestly, I constantly feel that I need to do more somehow, but I don't really know. So I will keep building shows. I think there's need for some hopefulness that all of these problems can be solved, but either by looking towards the past or looking in the present moment and seeking out the best possible solutions. And public awareness is a big factor in how our politics works. So, yeah, I have not done anything on climate. I probably will, but I'm going to do as much as I can.
Well, you say you're failing at your mission. I would challenge that. I would say you're succeeding at your mission. You have not solved all the world's problems and brought the utopia into being. But remember, Lindsay, it's progress, not perfection. So you're making a positive impact, and I can tell you that as a consumer, um, as well as somebody who feels very, very good standing behind your work and advocating for that in the marketing community. I think it's content worth supporting. Um, so I want to ask you about another thing that's going on in the world, which we have a particular interest in, which is polarization. Um, what is your perception of how polarized we are today, and how big a threat is that?
Um, I think we're often awful polarized. We have been this polarized before, and we kind of already talked about the mission of American elections wicked game to kind of demonstrate that.
Yeah.
Certainly in the presidential political sphere, we have a peculiar system that leads almost mathematically to a two-party system, and that then there's not enough room for any other viewpoint other than opposition. We're not a parliamentary system that has third, fourth parties and coalition governments. Maybe we should be, but that's a different question. Is it dangerous? Yes. Are there better systems? Probably. Can we fix them in the short term? I don't know. What is probably most dangerous is that, along with our endemic polarization built into the system, is this new media, this new how we collect our stories about ourselves and form our worldviews has been reduced to headlines and improper sources. I don't I don't think that the internet is inherently bad or social media is inherently bad, but what it does do is make voices that were never loud before much easier to hear. And there's a certain charlatanism, readily available to any consumer on social media. And the thing is, we're the same animals we have been. We're susceptible to the same things. If ever you've read a book of history and you thought how foolish and inept these people are, so are we. We've not really learned. We just get fooled by different things, and I dismay at how easily we are persuaded by things that should not be there to persuade us. There's a case to be made for gatekeeping, for 3 network channels and your hometown newspaper, and that's it. I don't know that that's a good case, but there was a case to be made that they had to vet stuff. That it was really hard and expensive to get that news into your ears, eyes, and so they had to make really good choices. Choices don't have to be good anymore.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and so what can our industry do, and what can we do as members of that industry to depolarize and to help solve some of the problem?
Um, Yeah, it's a great question, but I think there is a certain amount of self-policing that's required.
Yeah.
We're seeing some of that, content warnings and people or things being pulled down from Twitter or Facebook and community standards, right? That's horribly difficult for these giant platforms to enact.
Right.
But other other companies, advertisers, content providers, we have every ability to police our own content and make sure that things said or published are true and constructive to the best of your ability. I think if you had a code of conduct, a set of ethical rules for your content, for your advertising, then you could and really thought about it and be
Yeah.
conscientious, then we could be better citizens, better content citizens. I don't know what the larger solution is, but there's a lot to be said for self reflection and just setting your own boundaries.
Indeed, and good news to share with you and anyone that's listening that kind of hasn't heard this already. But if you go to MediaRoundtable.com, you can see that we are on a path to doing just that as we speak. It's a work in progress, right? But we are trying to help put forth a series of standards that should apply to different genres, whether it is news or opinion-driven content, to help advertisers know what good should look like and to have some ability to have a lens on all of this user-generated content that's not being provided right now, so they can make sure that they're supporting content that aligns with their values, and that's what we're really trying to work on here. So you have been a great part of doing that anyway. Nobody's had to police you. And I do believe that you're not only creating something that's informative and entertaining, but I believe it's a service, what you're doing. What can you share with us about the next chapter for Lindsay Graham and the work that you are doing? What can we expect from you down the road?
Well, apparently an environmental podcast.
Yes.
No, well, the answer is more podcasts.
Yeah.
They won't necessarily be hosted by me. They won't necessarily be history podcasts. I think there is a deep desire for me, as I've expressed, to do more in this space and expand my reach. Because it's influencing people and hopefully influencing people for the good. So I would want to do that as much as possible. I think you'll probably hear Airship as a brand more and more coming up. We've been kind of a production house, label for a long time, but we'll take more ownership of that brand, and hopefully people will recognize it. And we'll take the opportunities that present themselves. Certainly podcasting is still a young medium, and there's a lot of growth to go, both in listenership and how the form evolves. So I'm excited to be part of that, and however I can, lead the charge.
Well, and you're doing a great job at it. If people want to follow you and stay up to speed on everything that you're creating, not just now but into the future, what should they do?
Right now, the best thing to do is probably follow me on Twitter. That's the place I live socially. That's Lindsay A. Graham, Lindsay with an A, middle initial A. I'm pretty responsive there. It's a nice little community of listeners I've got. I don't have a newsletter or anything of the sort right now, mainly because I'm too busy podcasting. But follow me on Twitter because I ask listener questions. I get a lot of ideas from listeners. I always enjoy interacting with listeners. And especially if you have a story about listening to a particular season or episode that touched you or moved you or made an impact, I just love to hear it.
Well, thank you, Lindsay. Thank you for what you do and for spending this time with us. And as always, this show is dedicated to advancing our mission of mobilizing marketers to promote truth and civility in journalism. We value clarity, truth, fairness, respect, de-escalation, and tolerance, and we invite you to engage with us at MediaRoundtable.com. And if you found the show helpful, you're committed to our cause, please follow us on iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you like to listen. It's always free. And if you're a marketer looking for support to live this out, you can get in touch with our agency, Oxford Road, by visiting oxfordroad.com and subscribing to our weekly newsletter, The Influencer. Special thanks to Bianca, Kyle, Jennifer, and the team at Podcast One. And as always, influence responsibly.